staff. So they got off a train at number 1 on the map there, and then they proceeded to the north. They need to put out a large print edition of that book. Lincoln and his party went through some battle scenes, and they saw a lot of bodies. I think this was an eye-opener for some of the folks. Then in number 3, Lincoln greeted by halted soldiers from the 1st Brigade, 2nd Division of the 9th Corps. That's number 3. Number 4 was when Lincoln met Grant at that house on Market Street in Petersburg. Number 5, Lincoln views buildings struck by Union artillery. And then number 6, they took leave of Robert and they returned with their party to City Point. Now on the 4th of April, the next day, Porter ordered the James River to be cleared of torpedoes as far as Richmond. The Admiral's barge was towed by a tug. Farragut came from Richmond in a Confederate truce boat, and this ticked Porter off because he was going to accompany the president up to Richmond, and he was going to probably claim some credit from the Union Navy, and here Farragut had already been to Richmond, and he's coming back down the river. So once again, you get those egos working. Porter separated the tug from the barge, and he left no Marine guard. Here's the President of the United States in an area just recently abandoned by the Confederates, and what he's got is 12 sailors guarding him. And this kind of reminds me, I was out on a cruise as a guest of the Navy one time, and they were going to have 3 burials at sea. And this particular ship, you had 2 Marines assigned to the ship, a combat cargo officer and a gunnery sergeant. And they were out there practicing, and I told the combat cargo officer, I said, "You have really got a problem." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You're trying to run a military formation with a bunch of sailors." He said, "Yeah, I don't want to get frustrated, so I turn it over to the gunny and give him the responsibility." So here's the president coming up with 12 sailors guarding him. Lincoln arrived at Richmond about 3:30. He was greeted by reporter Charles Coffin of the Boston Journal. Coffin described the people surrounding the president as a surging mass. Lincoln expressed his thoughts to General Weitzel, "Let them up easy." And that was his attitude, and one of the great tragedies is him getting assassinated and turned it over. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said that Thaddeus Stevens wanted to abolish the southern states. They were just going to have military districts. It was going to be a conquered nation, which we did for a while. Unknown to Lincoln, Lincoln says, "Let them up easy." Unknown to Lincoln, Grant had ordered Weitzel to arrest editors and proprietors of Richmond newspapers. On the next day, Lincoln informed Admiral Porter that he would like to see more of Richmond before Judge Campbell arrived. Judge Campbell had been a Supreme Court justice, and he was going to meet with Lincoln. He had met with him once before, and he was going to meet with him to see if they could work out something. Porter finally detailed 24 Marines to guard the president. They were equipped as light infantry with rifles and bayonets. Some cavalrymen provided additional escort. Porter said that the streets seemed to be suddenly alive with the colored race. They seemed to spring from the earth. The Marines were ordered to fix bayonets. An American flag was flown over Libby Prison, and they had punched a hole in the roof to put the flag there, and it was crooked, and Lincoln says, "That's nice, but you need to straighten out the staff." So he didn't let anything go unnoticed. Provost Marshal Brigadier General Edward H. Ripley had spoken with a former Confederate agent who reported that there was a plot to kill the president. Ripley encouraged Lincoln to take more precautions. Lincoln replied, "It is impossible for me to adopt and follow your suggestions. I deeply appreciate your feeling, but I must go on in the course marked out for me, for I cannot believe that any human being lives who would do me harm. Weitzel arrived about 10 o'clock with Judge Campbell, and Lincoln was hoping that Campbell had some sort of authorization from Jefferson Davis, but he did not. He had no letter, had no authority to negotiate. But Lincoln expressed three principles, three terms. Number one, a recognition of the national authority. Number two, there would be no cessation of hostilities until number one was complied with. The third thing was there would be no receding by the executive in reference to slavery, as manifested in the Emancipation Proclamation and other official papers. Lincoln wanted the legislature that had voted for secession to rescind that action. He wanted to be lenient to all, and he had no feeling of vindictiveness or exultation. But there would be no pardon for Jefferson Davis. He told Judge Campbell that if the war continued, the Yankees would continue to confiscate rebel property. Lincoln then took the Admiral's barge to the River Queen and returned to City Point. Brigadier, let's look at the other side of that map now, the Richmond, and that gives at the bottom. I couldn't read what was up there, so I took my magnifying glass and typed it at the bottom. He landed with Porter at number one. He encountered Coffin. It was crowded passage through the marketplace, turned west on Franklin Street. He paused to catch his breath, and he connected with Brigadier General Shepley and Major General Couch. And he picked up a cavalry escort there. He turned north on Governor Street. He toured the first floor of the White House and had a light lunch. He met with Campbell, Greene, and Anderson. Then he toured Capitol Square with his cavalry escort, spent the night aboard Malvern, and came back. Now, there's no, Barton, I don't think there's any actual eyewitness evidence that he sat in Jefferson Davis's chair. Is that true? Yeah. Yeah, that is one of those anecdotes that may or may not have happened.
Fake news.
Beg pardon? Don't let them hear about that in Washington.
Still doing it.
Very good, very good. On the 6th of April, Lincoln received a message from Mary Todd Lincoln that she was returning to City Point. She arrived aboard the ship at 11:45. She was accompanied by Charles Sumner, wonderful company, and others. At 1 p.m., River Queen left for Richmond with Mary and Tad aboard. Lincoln did not meet with Vice President Andrew Johnson, who would visit Richmond the next day. On the 7th, Assistant Secretary of War Charles Dana visited Lincoln. Lincoln requested a special train to take Mary and her guests to Petersburg. After returning to City Point, Lincoln was visited by Congressman Elihu B. Washburn of Illinois and James G. Blaine of Maine. Now, Blaine is known in history as the opponent of Grover Cleveland. And the saying was, Blaine, Blaine, James G. Blaine, the continental liar from the state of Maine. He would have been very effective back then. On the 8th, Lincoln visited hospitals and he remarked, I came here to take by the hand men who have achieved our glorious victories. Now, at City Point, they didn't have space to put the two boats end to end. The River Queen was outboard of a boat that Julia Grant had control of. Mary Todd insisted that they move those boats so that she wouldn't have to walk across Mrs. Grant's boat to get to her boat. Petty, petty, petty. Lincoln, there was a French visitor aboard the ship, and I wish that they had used this next sequence of events and what he said in the last 40 to 50 years. He asked the French, he had the band play the Marseillaise, and then he asked him, he said, "Have you ever heard Dixie?" And the Frenchman said, "No." Lincoln said, "That tune is now federal property. It belongs to us, and at any rate, it is good to show the rebels that with us they will be free to hear it again." Boy, has that been forgotten in recent years. At 11 p.m., River Queen and the USS Bat got underway. On the 9th of April, the ship stopped at Fortress Monroe at 4:30 a.m. They arrived at Washington at 6 p.m. Mary said to old Abe, "Washington is full of our enemies." He said to her, "Enemies, we should never speak of that." And he got a message at 9 o'clock that night that Lee had surrendered. So this was I feel like that I've been living with these people for the last few days as I've gone through this. I read the book once, I read it again to prepare the talk. A lot of you know Mark Ramsey that runs Owens and Ramsey. And Mark said that he really liked that book too. And he said, "I don't know what Jill," that's his wife, "I don't know what Jill's going to say about this book because she hates Abraham Lincoln." But it does give you a good insight, and it has various characters. You got Sherman wanting to get some credit. You got the two admirals going at each other. But through it all, I think Lincoln was focusing on, he was looking ahead, and he wanted to focus on putting the nation back together. So that's it, folks. Questions? Now, I will say this. I probably won't be able to answer your questions because there's a lot of stuff in here, but I'll look it up in the book and tell you where to find it. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Mike Coleman with the National Park Service is somewhat of an expert of Lincoln coming to Richmond. And last year, several years ago, he actually walked Lincoln's walk from the place of embarkment on the land all the way up to the White House and then the Capitol. I was fortunate enough to assist him as a volunteer with the Park Service on that walk. And I don't know if they plan it again in the future, but I'll tell you, if they do, it's worthwhile to walk with Mike. Just like you, Mike can tell you stories that occurred, and it's a worthwhile walk if they decide to do it again. I'm sure they'll publish it, on their website, should they decide to do it.
Yeah, it sounds like a great thing.
It was. Mike is very, very informative of Lincoln being in Richmond, and probably could answer your question about whether or not he actually sat in Jefferson Davis's chair.
Okay.
I don't know if he can or not, but if anybody can, it would be Mike back then.
Somebody over here has another question.
Walter, Lincoln also, after he left the White House, did a tour of the area to the east, excuse me, to the west. It's disputed as to how far west he went and what his route was, but does Trudeau discuss going to that at all, or does he just ignore it? Because the map here ignored it.
Yeah, I don't remember.
It's not on the map, so I assume he did not discuss it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention.
So what book are you reading now? Or you made a promise you're not going to read any more books because it just gets you in trouble?
I'm reading about Custer, and I'm getting to the good part now.
All right.
The Indians are getting ready to take. Speaking of that, one time Ed Barsh was down, and somebody asked him to go and inspect the 54th Mass reenactors, and walking along, one of the people that was going with him, somebody said, "Mr. Barsh, what do you think about Custer at the Little Bighorn? Glory-seeking SOB got what he deserved."
The rest of it's careful.